Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at rounds number 4 and 5 of the 2025 Louisiana State Chess Championship. Now, yesterday, I got off to a very good start, winning all 3 of my games against somewhat lower-rated opponents. As we are headed into the home stretch of this event, there are a couple of players who are around master level. I cannot take the games for granted, especially after my third round game yesterday when I played against a 1900 from Colombia who put up an amazing fight in the game. So last night was a little bit of a wake-up call that I need to be a bit sharper, not as casual about the games, because at the end of the day, even if these players are lower rated, they are still incredibly dangerous. So in the 4th round, I'm playing with the black pieces against Ralph Tan, who has a USCF rating of 2224. His FIDE is a little bit lower, I think around 2100, but nonetheless someone who could potentially pose a threat. Now, in this tournament, I feel like if I have the white pieces, generally I should be in pretty good shape, but with the black pieces, a little bit trickier. Opponents are generally well prepared, so let's jump right into the action. Now, my opponent in this game, Ralph Tan, I actually looked at some of his games before the round, and I saw that he had played in quite a few Title Tuesday events recently, and in Title Tuesday, Ralph Tan was playing the move 1 to e4. Now, I was paying attention to the games being played here in this Louisiana State Championship, and I saw that in one of the earlier rounds, he had a system which resembled the Catalans, something like G3 and Bishop G2. So I wasn't sure what to expect in this game, my opponent having played e4 in Title Tuesday, and then having played d4, knight f3 here. So the game starts with the move knight to f3, and now I play this move c5 pretty quickly. Now, the reasoning behind me playing c5 is I didn't know what to expect on move 1, and I actually thought that my opponent, Ralph Tan, was a traditional e4 player, so I wanted to give him the opportunity to play e4, transposing back into the classic Sicilian. Instead, he goes g3. Now I play the move knight c6, we get c4, and here I play the move pawn to g6. Now, one of the things that's really important here is the opening phase of the game. Now, one thing that I can say about myself is the problem with being a top player, and you're probably going to think, what's the problem? There can be no such problem, is that when you play these games, because of the huge and vast amount of knowledge that I have, a lot of it is very similar to poker, where I'm thinking about different setups, different variations, and what my opponent can do, whereas my opponent probably has none of these thoughts in their mind. Now, I was thinking about whether I wanted to play this move e5 and play a classic Botvinnik system, but ultimately the reason I rejected playing it is that I thought that the play for white is a little bit too easy, the plans are very straightforward, and my opponent won't have to think early in the game. So, I was using a lot of time here. Ultimately, I decided to play the move g6 instead, and now we get the move bishop g2. I go bishop g7, knight c3, and now I play the move d6. Here, Ralph Tan castles, and now I play this move bishop to d7. Now, the problem that I mentioned earlier about overthinking is that even though I might know what the best variations are, more often than not, my opponent isn't going to know, and that actually in many ways is the biggest challenge of such tournaments, because when you have this knowledge, you're kind of doing the 50-50. You're thinking, will my opponent know this line? Will he not know that line? And generally, I would say overthinking is a big deal for a player like myself. So I go bishop d7 here. Now we get to move e3, and here I play the move queen c8. Now, anybody who has followed my online chess games, you've seen the system with d6, g6, and bishop d7, queen c8 a million times. Just to show you the normal way I get it, we have something like this, d4, d6, bishop g2. Let's just say knight c6, white castles, bishop d7, c4, and then move queen c8. Now, when I play this online with a lot of success, I might add, usually the idea here is to play bishop h3 and trade off the light square b's, but one big difference between this position and the position I had in the game is that there is a big white center here. White has some grip and can even go e4 to create the pawn wall of 3. So, back to my game here after bishop d7 and the move queen c8. You'll notice here that white does not actually have the big white center, but on top of not having the big white center, my idea here is actually not to play bishop h3 and h5, h4 attacking on the king side. And if white goes d4, I instead want to play bishop g4, pinning the tail on the donkey. The knight is pinned. You move the knight, lose the queen. And now white also has to deal with pressure in the center of the board as well. Now, if white plays with like knight to e2, I can play h5, h4, and knight to h6. And this is already a very, very complex position. I have this really nice wooden shield on g4, potentially pinning the knights or the queen. My knight can jump to f5, and there's all kinds of chaos in this position. And it's a very, very rich position where both players have serious possibilities to create counterplay. Now, for me, this is obviously what I want. I want imbalance against a lower rated player. I don't want something that is boring and potentially very positional. So I play queen c8, and now Ralph Tan plays move knight d5. Now it's very clear here when Ralph spends nearly 40 minutes on e3 and then plays move knight d5, he's feeling uncomfortable, he doesn't have an obvious plan. He of course is also feeling the Hikaru effect, there's no doubt about it, and knight d5 is simply an inaccurate move. So after knight d5, I play knight to f6 here, trying to trade off these knights. We get a3, and now I play the move rook b8. Now when I play rook b8, my idea here is to play b5, opening up the b file. Now the great thing about being at the level I'm at in chess is that even though this is not maybe the most natural idea, I'm very easily able to come up with this move because there's a similar variation in the Botvinnik system where black plays just to set it up. You get some position like this, let's just say bishop d2, where white plays a move like knight d5, and now you go rook b8 with the idea of playing something like a3 and b5 right away to open up the file. Very similar, a little bit different in terms of placement of the pieces, but the same general concept. And this is why I oftentimes stress to players that as you become a stronger intermediate player, you want to start experimenting with more openings, because when you have more versatility and you sort of play more openings, some of these ideas will start to come a little bit more naturally. So after rook b8, we get d3. Of course, I play b5, and now Ralph plays the move bishop d2. I trade on c4, and here I play the move knight to e4, opening up the long diagonal for the bishop and the rook while attacking the bishop on d2. Now you might be thinking, why not just take the juicer on b2? If I were to take on b2 after bishop c3, suddenly the rook is under pressure here, and if I move the rook away after knight, takes, and queen d6 here, my king is stuck in the middle of the board, I cannot castle, and my two pawns are hanging, and this is an epic disaster here, and I will lose the game and embarrass myself completely. So I go knight e4 instead here. Now we get the move rook to a2, I take, and here I play the move a5, stopping white from playing the move b4. Now at this point, black is doing very well because there's a very passive rook on a2 that's stuck guarding this pawn. It's out of play. Combine that with the fact that I have the two b's in this position. This is simply a dream, and to make matters even worse for white, I'm also up 40 minutes on the clock. So we get knight g5. I play queen d8, knight e4, and now I finally castle my king. And at this point, I already knew I was going to win the game. So we get rook c1, I play a4 here, trying to activate the horse on the edge of the board. We get f4, and now I play the very important move rook to e8. Now this move is important because if I get sloppy and play knight a5 right away, apparently this is still winning. Oh, because I thought white could take the pawn on e7. If I take, white can take. Apparently here I have f5 winning the pawn on e3 and everything is collapsing. I actually missed this, to be honest, so I decided to be very prophylactic and play rook e8 guarding the pawn first, even though knight a5 actually would have been the best move. So we get knight c3. Now I go knight a5, queen e2, and I play the move queen to c8. And here we get the move bishop to f1. Now when I play queen c8, the idea behind this move is I want to stop white from ever really pushing the pawns on the king side here, like g4 or h3. And with the queen and the bishop lined up, white has no activity. So we get bishop f1. Now I play bishop c6, trying to pressure the two knights here with my two b's. And now we get the move knight d2. Now this move is a move which loses effectively immediately. At this point, it's already really hard for white to play. Say you play a move like bishop g2, I can go queen to a6. Let's say white goes knight d2 here. And now after knight b3, let's say white were to take here, I can play rook b3, takes. And with rook b8 and potentially queen b7 incoming with a legendary triple stack on the b file, this position is actually lost according to the computer. Now white will struggle on, but the result is never in doubt. And when you combine the level of the players, I think it's even more clear. So here we get the move knight d2. Now one of the great things about being way up on time in the situation here is that I'm able to take a breather and spend about 5 minutes before playing the winning move pawn to e5. Now the reason this move is so effective here is that if white takes on e5 after rook takes e5, there's a big weakness on this e file. This pawn is under massive pressure. There are many ways for me to try and attack this pawn here. And if white doesn't take, what white would ideally like to do is play a move like queen d1, pawn takes pawn, and take back with the pawn and keep the game going. But if white does this, there's now bishop d4, and suddenly from out of nowhere, the white king gets checkmated by the two bishops on the long diagonals. And if white is unable to take with the e-pawn because of this check on d4, then white's pawn structure is permanently ruined. So Ralph plays knight to e4 here. Another move just to show one sample line is say white were to play a move like bishop g2, after takes, g takes f4, black can sack the rook with rook takes pawn, and after queen takes and bishop d4, it's uh-oh spaghetti-o time. White loses the queen and the game. So we get knight d to e4. Now I play the move queen to e6, guarding the pawn on d6 while preparing to open up all the diagonals. And of course I can't draw the arrows, opening up the diagonals and the center of the board as well. Ralph goes knight g5, queen e7, we get bishop g2. I trade the bishops, I take on f4, Ralph takes back. But now after queen takes e3, I'm up a pawn on the center of the board. White has this terrible rook on a2. Combine that with all these weak pawns that are going to collapse, and the rest is hopeless. We get takes, knight takes pawn, I check, king h1, and now I play the bone crusher rook to b3. Now, the reason this move pretty much ends the game effectively here is that white can't bring the knight back, because after knight c3 takes, if white takes, you lose the rook in the game. So you can't really move this knight. This knight is stuck off sides. If you play a move like rook to a1, hoping to play rook e1 and trade the rooks, after h6, suddenly this knight on g5 gets completely stuck here. My rooks cover all the critical squares, and the knight goes bye-bye. So we get rook to f1 here. Ralph trying to keep a square available for his knight, but now I simply take the pawn on c4. Both these pawns are weak. White's king is weak. There's just not a whole lot white can do, even though only being down one pawn in this position. We get rook f3, I trade the rooks, and now I go rook to f2, pressuring the knight and the pawn. We get knight g1, and here I play the excellent move knight to e3. Now, of course, I could take the pawn on b2, I could take the pawn on f4 here, but due to the very passive nature of white's pieces, this rook on a2 that's stuck, the knight on a4 that's way out of play, the knight and the king in the corner, there's no need to take the pawns. I can simply go in for the kill right away. Now, if white were to play a move like rook to a1, after knight g4 here, suddenly white is going to lose material or get checkmated immediately. If you push the pawn, it's checkmate in one. If you go knight to h3, I take, and then I win the knight, and it's game over. So therefore, Ralph has to play knight h3. I go rook to c2, Ralph plays rook a1, and now I play the move knight to g4, attacking this pawn with both the knight and the rook. Now here, Ralph Tan decides to play the move rook g1. He's obviously losing on the board, and he's close to flagging as well. He decides to play rook g1, allowing me to play the beautiful checkmate. This is now the second time in the tournament that I've been able to play a checkmate on the board with rook takes h2, and with that, the game ends in a victory for me. So with that, when I move to a score of 4 out of 4 in the tournament, the pairings keep getting tougher. Now, going into the fifth round, I was fully preparing and expecting to play against the number 2 seed in the tournament, Nicolas Mata from Louisiana, who's rated about 2250 FIDE, someone who has played over the board against strong players such as Hans Niemann and Levi Rosman. So that's what I was expecting in round 5, but to my shock, I actually got a different pairing. I ended up playing against the player Mark Schulenkamp instead, with a rating of 1900 FIDE. Now, I do want to add a little bit of color for this game. There are a couple of important points. The first thing, which I did not know before this game, and one of the things that I think makes chess such a great game, is that apparently my opponent is someone a little bit older. He's close to 60 years old, but he's somebody who played a lot of chess in his youth. He actually was around master level. He's someone who played before computers took over the game. And unfortunately in 2002, 20 years, or 2000, I think it was 2005, 20 years ago, unfortunately my opponent actually lost everything during the Hurricane Katrina disaster that occurred here in New Orleans. Now, I didn't know this before the game, but I actually would find this out after the game. When I did a post-mortem analysis, I analyzed the game with my opponent. And I did want to add that note because it's important to note that even though we're playing the game of chess, there are a lot of life stories. There's a lot going on for many different people, and that is a bit of color. Now, as I mentioned, I thought I'd be playing the number 2 seeded player in the tournament, but my opponent, Mark Schulenkamp, in the 4th round of this event, he actually won his game to move to a perfect 4-0 score, and I would be remiss if I did not show a little bit of that game. It was not relayed live, and it probably would be completely lost to the sands of time had I not actually looked at that game. So before we get into my game, I want to show this game that Mark Schulenkamp with the white pieces won against, I believe, Dex Webster, another master level player locally, and we got this classic Con Sicilian. So Schulenkamp plays bishop e3. We get d5, bishop e3, takes, knight d2, knight f6, bishop g2, e5, knight e2, bishop f5, castles, queen c7, knight c3, knight c6. Now in this position, white could obviously take the pawn on e4 here, and after the trade of the knights and something like rook d8, the position is pretty balanced, not a whole lot is going on. Instead, in this game, Schulenkamp would play this move pawn to f3. We get pawn takes pawn, queen takes pawn, and after the move bishop g4, Mark Schulenkamp would unleash a spectacular queen sacrifice with queen takes knight, pawn takes, and the move knight d5. Now, in this position, white is down a queen for a lone pony here, but due to the lack of the development of the king and the rook, the forks that abound in this position, white actually is completely fine. The computer says this game should end in a draw after queen c8, takes, and a repetition with check and back. If black goes forward, there's bishop d5, checkmating the king in the middle of the board. King has no squares available. But Instead, the game continued with queen d8 after knight takes f6, king e7, and knight takes g4. White is down a queen for a bishop and a knight here, but Schulenkamp with the great pieces, the active rooks in the center of the board, would go on to win this beautiful, beautiful masterpiece, which put him on a perfect score and led to the pairing between me and him. So, now back to the game that I played. I have the white pieces here, and I decided to play the move c4. Now, I knew my opponent was very aggressive because I had seen this great masterpiece in the previous round, so we get another King's Indian. Now, I decide once again to play the classic fianchetto variation with g3 and bishop g2. Main reason, again, is knowing that my opponent is so tactical, I want to steer the game towards something a bit quieter. So, we get the standard setup, we get knight d7, again I play e4, c6, and now I play the move h3. Now this position, of course, is very similar to the game that I had last night against Villamil from Colombia. By the way, a big shout out to him. He wrote a really, really nice comment on the previous recap we did, so big shout out to him. So once again, we end up with the same variation of the fianchetto King's Indian. So we get queen e7, I go rook e1, rook e8, and now I play the move pawn to d5. Now what's funny about this position is that, once again, much like in the fourth round, in my mind I was going through these positions, and there's actually a position I've had many times which is similar with rook e8, rook e1, and queen c7 against none other than the famous Belarusian Grandmaster Alexander Rustamov. Now, I've had this position for the blacks against Rustamov probably 100 times. I believe that I've also had this against Daniel Naroditsky many times in Blitz. So in my mind, after this in this position, after queen e7 and rook e8, I was thinking to myself, do I want to play d5 like Rustamov has played a million times against me? Now, ultimately, I would play d5, which is probably not a bad move per se, but I was kind of annoyed at myself that I didn't play the move bishop e3. There is an important point I want to make, which is when I actually went over this game with my opponent afterwards, there was a kid nearby who asked an important question, which is, why does white play this move h3? Like, why do you include this move h3? And the reason is specifically that now white can go bishop e3, over protecting this pawn on d4, and black cannot harass the bishop with knight to g4, because then you would lose the pony. So I probably should have played bishop e3, but ultimately I played d5, and here actually I kind of expected my opponent to trade the pawns and try to play something like a6 and b5, but instead he played a move that I think is very logical, pawn to c5. Now you'll of course notice the computer loves the position for white, but when you play the King's Indian defense, you are always looking to attack, attack, attack. And I really love this decision because for my opponent, Mark Schulenkamp, he can now try to play very quickly and attack on the king side, which is in his best interest here to try and create complications. Because I will say, for strong grandmasters, they will almost never lose a positional battle, but if you can get into a very sharp tactical skirmish, there are chances that they will miscalculate, and maybe you can pull off the big upset. So I played the move a3 here. I actually thought in retrospect I should have maybe gone bishop g5 and bishop d2. The reasoning being that if we get something similar to the game here, maybe with the pawn on h6 versus h7, there might be a knight h4 idea tickling this pawn on g6. Instead I go a3, rook f8, I play b4, knight e8, and now I play the move queen c2. Now I'm going to admit that I actually was not very happy with this position because even though I thought I was doing okay here, I knew my opponent would have very quick plans with f5 and f4. So we get f5. Now, I actually thought it might be better to play something like knight c7 first and then f5 just to cover the square on e6 from a knight jumping. But ultimately, after f5, we get knight g5, and now we have the move knight f6. Now, what I think Schulenkamp should have played here was the move knight to b6 here, because now the bishop covers the square. But much more importantly, this knight is attacking the pawn on c4. White's apparently better after takes and rook to b1, but at least here there are no clear-cut plans for white. And I actually thought maybe black could even go knight takes c4, or maybe something like e4 and try to create counterplay. Apparently after knight takes e4, white is still winning, but I thought this was the best try. Instead, we get knight f6. Now I take on f5, and here we get the move bishop takes f5. Now, my opponent, who I analyzed with after the game, he mentioned that he initially wanted to take back with the pawn here, but after takes, this fails to a very nasty tactical idea. Knight to e6, takes, and I don't take the bishop on e6, but instead I play rook takes e5, and the bishop is pinned here, and after knight c7, takes, and knight e4, if white plays a move like bishop f4, you get takes, and something like bishop takes c3 with the two b's on these wide open diagonals here. White is simply winning according to the computer. So we get bishop takes f5. This move that's very regrettable. As someone who plays the King's Indian a lot myself, you almost never want to take the pawn on f5 with the bishop. You always want to take with the pawn, but it simply doesn't work. And so in this case, we get takes. I go queen to e2. And now I was feeling really comfortable with my position because the knight is still going to go to e6 here. The center of the board is kind of collapsing for black. There's no attack. Black is not pushing p on the king side. And I knew I would win. So we get h6, play knight e6, takes, we get takes, knight c7, and now I play the move knight to d5. Now here I could take the pawn on b7, but the reason I play knight d5 is that I simply want to create a protected passed pawn on the center of the board. Again, if I take and black goes rook b8, probably after bishop g2, white is winning, but black at least can try to pretend to bring a knight to the center of the board. Apparently knight b5 wins here, but I was in a mode of trying to allow 0, 0, 0 counterplay, and I wanted to create a positional battle. So I go knight d5. Now my opponent has to trade. You can't take the juicer because knight takes knight, and after takes and pawn takes, this is just a huge disaster. I have a protected passed pawn on e6. I'm going to bring the bishops to the center of the board, and at this point, black is already close to lost. So we get a6. I play bishop to e4. We get to move queen to f6. I go bishop e3, and now we get to move rook c8. I play rook c1, knight b5, and here I go queen g4, shifting my focus completely to the king side here with the queen and the b's. Now, I will admit that I actually thought at this point the game was over immediately, but my opponent was very, very resourceful here. He found the only move knight to c3, which doesn't lead to an instant resignation, and for a brief second, I thought that I might have messed up this game. Now, I thought here the game was over, because I thought after rook, takes, and say g5, for example, I can play something like bishop d3 and queen to e4, setting up a double A battery. If black plays g5 to guard the pawn, after e7, the game ends immediately because suddenly I open up the double threat of the rook here on c8, and I target the rook on f8, and after rook takes rook, I take with check, and after takes rook, I'm up a rook, and I win the game immediately. So I actually thought the game was over, but when Schulenkamp played knight to c3, I realized that there was still work left to be done. So I played the move queen takes pawn. Now, I had many options here. I thought about bishop takes pawn, knight takes, for example, and something like bishop f7, and I thought I'm so much better here, but I didn't see a conclusive way to end the game immediately. I also considered sacking the rook with rook takes knight, rook takes, and queen g6 here, for example, but after takes, and rook c8, while I'm pretty sure that I'm winning here with all these pawns going up the board, I wasn't 100% convinced, and black's moves here become very easy. Black tries to win the pawn and push p himself. So ultimately, I go for the move queen takes pawn. We get trade, knight takes pawn, and now I play the move rook c d1. Now, I have to be a little bit accurate here because initially I wanted to play check, but after king h8 and rook d1, black can take the pawn. After rook d6 and knight c2 here, black is maybe still in the game to some degree. Apparently, rook c1 wins, but say I go rook e2, we get takes, and rook to c7 here. Maybe black can save the game with these two outside passed pawns. So I go rook d1. We get knight takes bishop, I take, and now I'm threatening to push my p here while attacking the pawn on d6. We get bishop f6, I take, and now I'm up a pawn with this passed pawn on the center of the board, the control of this open d file. The rest is going to be very simple. We get king g7, I drop the bishop back, targeting the pawn. We get rook c7, I check, and now at this point, these pawns on the queen side are collapsing. I have this pawn that's one square from queening, and the game is all but over. So we get b6, I play rook a3, we get a5 here. If my opponent were to play rook d8, I can go bishop c6, guarding the pawn and the a8 square at the same time. And once again, all these pawns on the queen side are going to collapse, and I'm going to be ahead by 2 pawns in the center of the board. So we get a5. I take, rook d8. I play bishop to f5 here, guarding the pawn on d7. We get king to f7, and now I play the move rook to a6. Now, at this point, I had a very clear construction of a plan I wanted to execute here, and I'm able to do it pretty easily. Got bishop g7, I play rook c6 here. Important move, because now the rook can never move away, because I simply go rook c8, and after king g2, I'm going to push my p with the rook covering the queening square on d8. So now black can never move the rook away because of rook c8. We got bishop to f6. I go king g2 here, and now we get to move bishop g7. Now, I could have tried to play rook e6 with this rook e8 idea similar to the game, but here black can at least try to go rook a8 and then rook to a1 and rook d1, at least stopping the pawn temporarily from queening. Now, this would be winning anyway, but I didn't want to allow it, so instead I decided to play the move king g2, stopping any checks on the back rank. We get bishop g7, I play h4, bishop f6, and now I play the move rook to e6 here with this very nasty idea of rook to e8. Now, you might be thinking black could take the pawn, but if black takes, I sack the rook with rook takes bishop, and after takes, I'm ahead by a bishop and a pawn, and there's no doubt about the result. So I go rook e6, we get bishop g7, and now I play the crushing move rook to e8 here. Pawn guards the rook. You're probably thinking, well, why not take? If takes, king takes queen, the game's going to end in a draw. But if black takes the rook on e8, I do not take the rook here. Instead, I play the in-between move, bishop g6, tickling the king on the diagonal. If you move, I queen and the pawn guards, or the bishop guards the pawn. And if you take, of course, I take the rook and I win anyway. So after rook e8, we got bishop to f6. I play bishop e6 check, tickling the king away, and now I go king to f3, and here my opponent resigns. Now what's amazing about this position is that even if somehow we were able to exchange all the pawns off the board here, this still would actually be a winning position here, because with the rook on e8 guarded, I simply walk the king all the way up the board. The rook can't get out of jail, and after king c7 here, I guard the pawn, I'm going to win the rook, and the game will end immediately. And that is why my opponent resigned here after I played the move king to f3, because I simply want to walk my king all the way up to c7 here. And if we get this position, I take, I move the king and promote the pawn. So black just can't do anything to stop this very simple, straightforward plan of marching the king to c7. As you'll notice, the king is deflected. It cannot get back here. The bishop is stuck guarding the rook. So black is just paralyzed. There's no way to stop this easy plan of walking the king and winning the game. So after king to f3, I get a very nice win in the 5th round against Mark Schulenkamp. I want to add a couple of notes as well. I know most people are probably not watching the recap still, but a couple of important notes. Now I would add, this is probably the first time after I played a game where I analyzed with my opponent in the Skittles room in probably at least a decade. It's something that does not happen in a lot of top-level competitions anymore, because we can go back to our rooms and look at the games with computers immediately and know what we did right or wrong. So it was really, really nice to be able to do that. It's something that is not common anymore. I really had a lot of fun analyzing with my opponent after this game. So it was really, really nice to do something I haven't done in a long time. It gave me that nostalgic feel of something from yesteryear, something that I never do anymore. So that was really, really nice. I also want to give a big shout out to all the participants and the fans who are watching this tournament. I know there have been some people on the internet who are being really negative about this whole tournament, but all the locals here have been nothing but encouraging. Many of them wishing me the best on my run towards the candidates as we go through this tournament. So I want to give a big shout out to all the locals here for the hospitality and the generally like really, really kind words. It's been a fun event. Everybody's rooting for me, so I can't state that enough. Now, I am on 5 out of 5. Tomorrow I will be playing against the number 2 seed, Nicholas Mata, or Mata. I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce it. He is someone who, like I mentioned, has played against some very strong players in the past, so it should be a big matchup. If I win that game, I think I'll probably go perfect, but let's see how the cookie crumbles. So 5 out of 5. 4 games down on my road to the 2026 candidates. We now have played 22 games. There are 18 more games left that I need to play before the end of the year to qualify for the rating spot. But it's been a blast so far. I'm enjoying my time here in New Orleans, Louisiana. So that's going to do it for our Day 2 recap. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we will be back with a recap tomorrow after the 3rd and final day of the 2025 Louisiana State Chess Championship. See you guys then. Have a good one. Bye.